So we're starting this week with consumption, not the dreaded tuberculosis of Victorian times consumption, but consumption like as in eating. Obviously, the most enjoyable, I think, aspect of our food system. I know I like to eat. Some people love to garden, but I think they love to eat as well. Um, so when we talk about the consumption and retail, so this is also to do with restaurants, home food preparation, all of that sort of stuff as well. When we think about that, we need to think about, I think, also why we eat what we eat, not just how and what, but we want to think about where that comes from. And food essentially exists in the context of culture. So what do we mean by culture? So society is made up of individuals that interact with each other to try to satisfy various needs. And culture is a word that anthropologists use to refer to the rules, customs, and any other shared plans or behaviors that result from that interaction. So I think of it as basically culture is basically mom, right? The rules that we live by. And so for our food culture, for many people, good food is simply the food that they're used to. So Americans love white bread, hamburgers, ketchup, while rural Zambians love mopane caterpillars, millet mush, and hippo meat. And both of us love those because that's what, quote, everyone eats. And there's no accounting for taste because food is neither good nor bad in the absolute. But we've been taught to recognize it as such. So our organ of taste is not the tongue, but the brain. And taste also can mean knowledge. So, like, he has good taste, she has good taste. That doesn't mean that she is a super taster or knows how well food tastes, but more like she knows or he knows what's good, what's fashionable, what's current. Somebody might be a taste maker. We also know that smell is a major component, perhaps the major component of taste. And preference can be genetic, but cultures also play a huge role in determining what smells good. Now, most of our favorite scents don't occur naturally or don't occur in nature. Things like frying bacon or fresh bread or apple pie or wine, those kinds of smells. And then when we start thinking about putrefaction smells or bad smells or smells of rotting food, most cultures have some form of acceptance of putrefied or rotting foods, but are horrified at others. So, for instance, many Japanese people are appalled that Westerners routinely eat things like cheese, because they just, it smells bad to them. It's just not something that should be done. And speaking of cheese, when my wife and I were in Paris many years ago, she's a less adventurous eater than I am. But we were looking forward to going to lots of different cheese shops and trying things. And over the course of our stay, she became accustomed to the smell of some really pungent kind of cheeses and began associating those smells, which initially might have been a little off-putting for her, with a good meal. And one day we were on the metro, which is the Parisian subway, and it was jam-packed, and we were, standing room only, and she was, pressed up against everything. She looked around, she saw that there were a couple of available seats, so she said, oh, let's sit down. We sat down, and all of a sudden we started smelling this, cheesy, delicious aroma, and she got very excited. She said, oh, somebody's got some good lunch, and I said, actually, look behind you. And when she looked behind, there was a bum who clearly had not washed in a considerable amount of time, stretched out on the seats behind her, and that was what she was smelling. So, the smells clearly are subjective, and what might smell good and delicious might turn out to be some bum's stinky feet. So we want to think about some aspects of American food culture. We can think about that generally being we value things that are quick, convenient, and above all cheap. We're also looking for generally minimal personal or economic sacrifice. And there are some of us who value looking good. And we choose foods that make us look good, perhaps eating in expensive restaurants or conspicuously consuming healthy foods like a kale salad, perhaps. We might value what food makes us look like or who that makes us appear to be. And our ideals change about both taste and what's good, what's bad. So in 1900, most of us were farmers and blue-collar workers, and only a few idle rich had a chance to eat enough and to do so little as to get fat. So fat was idealized, and behemoths like Diamond Jim Brady and Diamond Lil or Lillian Russell, they were targets of emulation. People wanted to be like them. I've posted picture, little info of Diamond Jim, and you can check out him and Lillian Russell. But the truth is, people love fat. So left to themselves, we tend to select exceedingly high-fat diets. So that's why we see, bacon potato chips and just all of the kind of high-fat foods that are on our supermarket shelves. Now, this might be one reason for what we can think of as food puritanism. So the idea that enjoying food is somehow sinful or not good. One main message of food is everywhere is solidarity. So eating together means participating and sharing. The word companion actually means bread sharer, compan. Buying somebody dinner or otherwise like feeding a prospect is so universal in courtship, in business, in politics, is almost certainly grounded in some kind of inborn revolutionary tendency. We evolved as food sharers, and we feel a natural link between sharing food and being personally close or involved with somebody. The flip side of that, kind of another main message, is separation. So food marks social class, ethnicity, so on. So food transactions can define families, networks, friendship groups, religion, virtually every other socially institutionalized group. Now, naturally, one group can use food to try to separate itself, while another is trying to use food to eliminate that separation. Examples of this in history might be if you take a look at Spanish and Portuguese recipes, very often you will see things put together like clams and bacon or some kind of shellfish and pork product. And this was done not necessarily because they were delicious, which they are, but because during the Spanish Inquisition, one of the crimes that people were persecuted for was being Jewish. And as Jews, they had prescriptions on things that they would not eat. So shellfish being, among some forms of shellfish being among them, and certainly pork. And so people started eating mixed meals of pork and shellfish publicly to sort of proclaim, you see, I'm not a Jew, I'm good, don't harass me, don't bother me, and that became part then of that food culture. In this country, many immigrants would privately hold on to their food traditions while publicly trying to assimilate by eating the foods where they've migrated to. We also construct identity and communicate that with regard to food. So somebody might say, "Oh, I'm a dry martini person myself," or "He's a meat and potatoes guy," right? And you get an idea of what kind of person that is, or what kind of person that's supposed to be. So, that kind of brings up the idea of foods as class markers. So in history, that's been so important that the elites have often resorted to what were called sumptuary laws. Laws that protected themselves from people trying to emulate them or their status. So those kind of laws usually ban the lower orders or lower classes from eating elite foods or wearing elite clothes, certain colors. Purple used to be reserved for royals, riding elite horses, so on. This is trying to stop the vulgar masses from buying status and eliminating the sort of elite lifestyle. Hand in hand with these ideas would be the idea of taboo. Okay, and taboos are found in most societies. So technically, we distinguish a taboo, which is a religious law, from simple avoidance. So, for instance, American Christians have no real taboos, except maybe in some sects like Seventh-day Adventists that observe Old Testament rules. But we Americans have many avoidances in food, including insects, dogs, horses. Although our avoidance of horse meat is actually a religious taboo, but we've forgotten that. The horse sacrifice was one of the greatest and most important sacrificial rites in ancient European religion, and recent converts you would backslide. So Pope Gregory the Great explicitly banned horse eating by Catholics in the early Middle Ages. Although the modern French do eat horse meat, that's kind of a new custom arising from desperation during sieges in the 19th century, during the two wars. There have been various theories about why pigs were explicitly banned in Old Testament and the Quran. Eugene Hun believes, and the evidence is pretty compelling, that the pig is banned because it eats blood and animals and carrion. And so all the creatures banned in the Old Testament are carnivores or scavengers, and all the carnivores and scavengers in the Near East are banned. So animals specifically listed as clean are those that are clearly vegetarian, and the Bible says this explicitly. So, there are theories that because they were unclean for eating garbage and things, and I don't know. I think his theory does matter. So back to American food culture. One of the things we can certainly see is that size matters. If we increase portion sizes, that causes both children and adults to eat more food. So very often, diet advice or diet books will tell you get smaller plates or smaller bowls to control your portion size, because we'll fill up our plates, right? Both children and adults will pour and consume more juice if they're given a short and wide glass rather than a tall, narrow glass. So certainly size matters, even when it tastes bad. Even when foods are not palatable, large containers and packages lead to overeating. So in one study, moviegoers were given stale, 2-week-old popcorn. They ate almost 34% more when they ate from a large container than from a medium-sized container. This is a concept, behind supersizing. Years ago, certainly when I was a child, which is years ago, fast food sizes were much smaller. Fries were a small package of fries. Sodas were very small, and there was a gentleman who was trying to convince Ray Kroc, who was the founder of the McDonald's chain, not the first McDonald's that was the McDonald's brothers, but he bought the concept from them, and Ray Kroc was the person who created kind of the McDonald's as we know it. There was a guy who owned drive-in movie theaters who had done some experiments because you may know that a lot of where movie theaters make their money is on the concessions, on the food and the drinks. And so he was trying to figure out how to get people to buy more popcorn, more candy, more, all of the things that he sold at the concession stand. And what his theory was that it was socially unacceptable for people to go up to take a second trip to the concession stand because everyone was watching them. Now, we all think that people are constantly judging us and thinking about us all the time. Truth is, we think about ourselves far more often than anybody else does. So, we're probably not being watched and judged. However, most of us do feel a little awkward or uncomfortable making a second or third trip to a buffet line or a concession stand. And so what this guy determined was that if he could get people to buy more in the initial trip, he would sell more, they'd eat more, maybe ultimately they'd be even happier. So he started increasing the size of his popcorn, increasing the size of his drinks. And he pitched this idea to Ray Kroc, who didn't believe him, who said, no, the size of the fries is fine. If people want more fries, they'll get up and they'll get more fries. The guy said, no, you watch, let me do an experiment. So they picked one restaurant, one McDonald's, to do this in, and indeed, the larger fries were selling more. People seemed to be overall happier, etc. So the concept of everything being bigger was born. And consequently, we've all gotten a lot bigger. Because it's true, the further you have to walk for food, the less you eat. So secretaries have been shown to eat half as many chocolates when the candies are 6 feet away from their desk rather than with their in arm's reach. Also, descriptors increase food sales and change customers' attitudes. So you describe something as, say, a Black Forest double chocolate cake rather than just chocolate cake, sales are going to go up. Also, people will probably report improved attitudes towards the food and the restaurant and say that they're more likely to return. So we've got food in the context of culture. What we eat is largely determined by where we're born. Clearly who our parents are and what kind of foods are fed to us growing up and what sort of exposure we've had. Now, most of us have had some sorts of childhood aversions or things that we just didn't like or wouldn't eat, some of which persist into adulthood and some of which we, let's say, grow out of, or our palates expand and we start eating different things. I'm father of a small boy, and it's at times frustrating the things that he will or won't eat. Although it's starting to shift now, slowly but surely. He's coming around. There are even entire television programs devoted to people eating weird foods or things that are not of their culture. They're eating maggoty blue cheese or snake's hearts or, other things that we would feel are just beyond the pale or nothing that we would ever really consume. We also, think we should think about the fact that here in Northern California, we have a fairly diverse food culture around us. And certainly during these times, when I was a child, I, first of all, didn't live in Northern California, but secondly, our food culture was, it was both more varied and less varied in some ways because, there was still a strong immigrant tradition, whether that be Italian or Irish or German or Scandinavian, things like that, that was still a big part of our culture, in ways that people have kind of become assimilated at this point, and it's generally our more recent wave of immigrants. So those from the Pacific Rim and those from Central and South America and Mexico that are kind of keeping those cultural traditions alive within their families, while also bringing us all into the fold. So that sushi is now so commonplace, we see it at the grocery store, and there are more Mexican restaurants in Mendocino County than probably any other type of restaurant. So our food. Our food palette has expanded a great deal, but we also need to keep in mind that we're in a very fortunate situation. We are in a place that is got a temperate climate, so our agriculture, we can grow things almost year round. There's a little bit where stuff isn't growing and it's too cold for sure, but we have a very long growing season. The coast is right here for me, literally. For many of you, maybe it's an hour away. So there's a fantastic variety of seafood. We have fabulous orchards. There are people raising cattle and pigs and lamb. So we've really got it good compared to some other regions of the country. So next week we're going to start talking about our patterns of consumption, how that might fit into kind of a global pattern of consumption, what might be amiss with the consumption part of our food system, and what we might be able to do to correct it. So for now, head over to the discussion forums. You do have an assignment coming up next week, and you'll see that detailed on the assignments tab.